Good evening, Rachel. Well, I gave myself a fairly big task for this video, which is to reveal some of the fundamentally good general principles that I could about a virtuosic left-hand technique on the cello. And I've got less than 15 minutes, I figure, to make that a useful video and not too long. So, first general principle, we need something that works, gets a result, and which won't injure us, which will allow us to play for years without getting sick, and which will feel good. It's pretty obvious that we can't take a totally random approach to left-hand cello technique and play the Dvorak concerto like that. There has to be order extracted from the available chaos, and I think that one of the things to keep in mind is that it's easy to have rules that are too strict and that actually underestimate the cleverness of the human organism for the task. I'm really very impressed with how amazingly clever string players' left hands become, and given the glory of bowing, probably the left hand is sometimes a bit undervalued for its cleverness. The first principle that I can think of is that I like to see everything that I'm doing in terms of the length of the fingerboard and in terms of a geometry for the left arm that makes sense to me, which is comfortable and which is going to work. And there are only a couple of options that I think might be worth considering for this. One would be to have my arm positioned about like so in the high register, and then to examine the rest of the fingerboard from there and aim to keep the elbow moving in more or less the same plane. I reject this one. Another would be, and it's quite commonly used and with good results, to begin out like so, to drop the elbow radically, and eventually to let the hand pass over behind the elbow, more or less. This one has good comfort value, but I figure as a first objection, it has my finger rather disadvantaged for the direction in which I mean to pull the stop. More about the direction of the pull of the stop later. Next useful tools I have analytically would be to see all stopping on the left side as pretty much belonging to one of three categories. The first category, quite easy to elucidate, would be the one that I associate with, say, guitar playing, where we play multiple stops, and the use of the hand would be along these lines, with the thumb extended, overextended almost, hyperextended, squeezing quite hard against the back of the neck of the cello, and the fingers organised to get the pitches they want as necessary. This can be done in poorer fashion, presumably, but the identity of this technique that I'm mentioning first would have to do with the backward squeezing of the thumb and fingers clamped down more or less in plier or vice fashion. We'll see how different this is from the two other modalities. The second one I would mention, I would associate not with chords or triple stops, quadruple stops, but I would associate it with rapid playing. And here the key difference would be that there is no clamping at all of thumb and fingers, and that the fingers are indeed asked to be as loose as possible and to lightly tap the string as necessary. This reminds me rather of spidering, spider legs running around, or if that's offensive to one would go for more like a crab-like sort of action. For rapid playing, a certain compact aspect is required so that we don't have too much movement, but there's still plenty of room for creative play. There can be little bits of pronation, supination of the forearm, of movement in these directions, of movement of the elbow, and in general it reminds me of one of my favourite principles that seems worth adhering to for left hand technique, is that all of the rest of the anatomy, especially from the shoulder down to the fingers, is presumably supposed to make the work of the fingers as easy as possible. So any little or even larger movements of the position of the elbow or rotation of the upper arm or of the forearm, moving towards or away from the right side of the cellist, all of these kinds of things should be, in my opinion, encouraged within reason. The stopping force of fast playing is usually very light, minimal, but it can be can have some more weight or impact at will, and regarding the size of the finger action, I would tend to use a larger finger action where I want the impact, the sound of impact of the finger to be larger. Last but not least, of the three modalities I would see as being useful for analysis of this very complex play that goes on with the left side, I would associate with singing playing, and especially I suppose with playing that might invite expressive vibrato. And the key aspect of this would be that there is some degree of pull, of drawing down of the finger into the string or into the fingerboard to get the stop. Here again, I forgot to mention, in the case of the rapid play, the use of the thumb would not have to do with providing any counter pressure at all. More about the use of the thumb soon in these two other modalities other than multiple stops. But in singing playing, it would be the same situation, that the thumb is not required for the stop because there is no counter pressure asked for. We simply have this kind of thing going on, and I would see it very importantly as the drawing of the finger down to the string, and then the continued slight drawing back and down that gives power to the fingertip, and the finger then being required not to straighten unduly in order to deliver the stopping force. One could think of that, I think, quite sensibly as the finger like a hook. Yes, a nice, sensitive, organic, fleshy, not rigid hook, but still a kind of hooking action as we would draw the finger downwards and backwards in combination. Okay, so about the direction of drawing downwards and backwards, this would be in a way kind of obvious, but it wouldn't be adequate to say that we would just use weight to get the stop, because weight would take my arm from here more or less in that direction, not in the direction that I need a stop. And so I like to remind myself and my students from time to time that the direction for stopping pressure is presumably a little different for each of the strings. Something like from and in this direction for the A string, for the D string, for the G string, and for the C string. And these differences in direction I easily feel in my body as pulling, like, you know, in that sort of direction or in this kind of direction. And I certainly can feel the different intention for each string way back in and I suppose behind my shoulder. Moving right along quickly, very aware of video length, not to be too long. Pack a lot in a short time, seems like a good idea. And my favourite, best analyses of left hand technique. So what is the thumb good for? Well, it's very good for squeezing in multiple stops, and basically gets in the way too easily, becomes the life of the party in the other two modalities, fast playing and singing playing. So I want to be careful not to pull or push upward with the thumb, except in multiple stops. And in my opinion, it's fine to leave the thumb off often. So I usually describe the use of the thumb to touch intermittently. And then it's very helpful for the fingers knowing which string they are going to touch. Without the thumb touching, I would be a little bit at sea which string I'm going to touch. And I think also that the thumb acts as a reference, a gauging member for when the string will be reached. So then we can design the moment, the place of impact very well, thanks to the thumbs sussing out for us roughly where that moment is going to be. And if I want to thump, for example, like hitting a tennis ball, it's good to know when the moment, where the moment of impact is going to be, and so the thumb is good for that. The thumb should, in my opinion, always be like the arm at the surface of the fingers, unless it's playing in thumb position. And I would always design comfort for a finger or for fingers before considering where I would want to put the thumb. And then the thumb would come up so as to make this natural relationship that we would expect, say, with my hand hanging beside me, which if I bring it up would look something like this, very much like a bow hold, which, well, for the same reason, that it's a natural, relaxed shape for the hand. So I have no qualms about the thumb being further over this way, not so far, or being further out this way. In fact, in the rapid playing on the A string that I've already demonstrated, the thumb might barely reach the neck, and I think this is absolutely fine. So, I think I have time to speak a little bit about the design of singing playing, because here we have really great interests in how to shape the fingers best. So, the default finger shape that I would hope to be able to use most of the time would be the one that I've already alluded to, that if I let my arm hang beside myself and relax everything as much as possible, I'm given my natural finger shapes, and I would look at either one of those as being ready to play singingly on the cello. We see, of course, that the fingertips are not the right distance apart, but that shouldn't worry us too much. Our feet are not very often the right distance apart to walk around, take steps, but we manage pretty well despite that. And so it reminds me that I would see singing playing as being essentially walking around the cello, one leg, one foot at a time. Always looking for the perfect comfort of one finger. Let me quickly explain how I would be thinking of perfect comfort. Let's take the index finger. So its natural fallen shape would be something like that. And if I give that to the cello, get the other fingers out of the way for a second. So there it is. The end of the finger not too tall for singing playing usually, and the point of the bone, if anything, a little bit to this side of the string, not right bearing down on the string. Thumb is irrelevant, does not really need it for stopping the string, so I look for this finger shape with a natural arch through the base knuckles and organise the rest of the arm to make the natural finger shape comfortable. If I'm going to touch with the thumb, it comes up last wherever it would, and only intermittently and lightly. So then it looks like this, and this is a good example of where too many rules can be bad. So if we take the attitude that it would be a good rule always to have fingers close to the notes that they may be about to play, then we would do this kind of thing, and I would play the E as near as possible to this. But this can never be virtuosic, or indeed human. There's no comfort anywhere, and this defensive mentality that I should stay as close to notes that might be played just doesn't work as an advanced or virtuosic technique. So the super comfortable index finger looks like that. Why are these fingers in this shape? Well, they need to be out of the way, obviously, of the A string, and it just is. And it is evidently for a lot of other cellists. Once you have the first finger playing comfortably and drawing backward and downward, the other fingers go like about that to be as relaxed as possible. In contrast, if I play the fourth finger, say, in this context, then these fingers would go about like so. Now this is not a failure of appropriate discipline to put the fingers like this. In fact, I would argue that to have one finger as comfortable as possible and the whole mechanism as liberated as possible is a very, very exacting kind of discipline, and let me talk you through that a little bit. Why are these other fingers like that? Well, they rise to about that height, and why are they not sitting down on the string? Well, they could be, if I didn't want vibrato, or perhaps even if I did, I might let the fingers drop down on the string, but to be perfectly honest, once I'm playing this note with vibrato, the scrabbling around of the other fingers touching the strings is a bit of a distraction, both as feeling and possibly as sound. So, the little finger as comfortable as possible like that, the other fingers hover in a semi-random looking kind of way, but they're very, very comfortable. Thank you. Seems to raise the rather obvious question, if I'm going to play in fourth position with the first finger like this and the pinky finger doesn't even reach the fingerboard, and then I'm going to play the fourth finger in fourth position so the index finger is roughly over the C string, how can this possibly work if I want to move from one finger to the other? And how can it be sane, given the alternative, which would be to play, which I would, by the way, use for, but not for singing playing. So it gives rise to useful bit of the analysis, which I would call transition. So often, in going from one comfortable finger, perfectly comfortable finger, to another perfectly comfortable finger, it's useful to conceive of what may be inevitable, that there needs to be a moment or two of transition where the old finger, so to speak, the first finger here, gives way towards where the pinky finger is going to want to go, the pinky finger moves towards its place, it touches down the continuation of the movement, and so we have this kind of transition from one finger to another, or in reverse, from this to this. Many sensible people seeing this kind of sophistication, but shall we call it failure of simplicity, too much complexity for me, thank you very much, could be rather aghast at all of this unnecessary movement. And so let me close this evening's video with a little defense of unnecessary movement. Word of warning. So we could look at the way most people walk and identify all kinds of unnecessary movements. After all, you could walk passably well without, let's say, much movement available in the knees, perhaps even with stiff legs at the knees. We could get around, but it wouldn't be as good walking as the more complicated form that involves pretty amazing extension and flexion of the knees. And so for the ankles and toes and hips, there's an awful lot of unnecessary movement in so many things that most people do very naturally. And this kind of unnecessary movement is not really unnecessary because we are obeying a very stern dictum, let one singing finger be maximally comfortable if this time, and move to another one which is maximally comfortable. And this is far more clever than a simpler approach, which would be to compromise the comfort of both fingers. Well, it's a start about left-hand technique. Not sure where I'll go from there, but I look forward to your company again soon.